Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to all of you. Welcome to CSIS. It is an honor for me actually to open a webinar on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. This is actually a seminar or webinar jointly organized by CSIS and YAI. This is part of a joint project, joint project, which also has the name of joint with CSIS and several others think tanks, several other research institutes in Europe. My name is Yose Rizal Damuri. I'm the executive director of CSIS. And again, I would like to welcome you to CSIS Auditorium. A special welcome to our colleagues from YAI, Riccardo and Giulio, who already traveled all the way from Italy to Indonesia. And also Ambassador Fasil Hamianin, the ambassadors of Ukraine to the Republic of Indonesia. Thank you very much, sir, for your visit to CSIS. It is amazing actually how the war several thousands or almost 10,000 away, more than thousands away from Indonesia has affected our life very significantly. 260 days ago, as an economist, actually, I was quite hopeful to the global economic situations. At that times, we have a good chance actually to enter a new normal. At that times, maybe not the normal that we know during in the pre-pandemic era, but nevertheless, it was quite optimistic times. But the war changed everything and actually brought a lot of misery to the people of Ukraine, for sure. The humanitarian crisis and extreme violence have become a significant part of their life. It's their daily life. It's very, it's very saddening actually. For the rest of the world, the war also means supply chain disruptions that threatens food and energy security that may lead to hunger and starvations. Furthermore, the war has also increased geopolitical tensions all over the world. We no longer in the lack of trust situations, but now we have trust deficit among countries, and that happens when the economic cooperation, when cooperations actually is needed to deal with various issues that we are facing at the moment. So, as an ordinary person with little knowledge of geopolitics, I only ask the questions whenever I discuss about this war in Ukraine. How the war will end? What conditions may lead to peaceful situations, peaceful solutions? And is that possible? That's one question that I always ask myself. In the case of escalation, how likely that the parties, especially Russian, to use the nuclear weapon, and how it may affect the situations in general? Yeah. Another question is also about how this war actually has affected and will affect more geopolitical mix in other regions, such as the one in East Asia and Pacific, especially with the rise of unilateralisms that often can be interpreted as either with us or against us. And of course, the last questions, I think the most important one for Indonesia is that how Indonesia and ASEAN perhaps could contribute to the advancements of peace in Ukraine. I think our discussions today will touch upon several of the issues that might also address those questions. So I really wish the public discussion this morning will improve our understanding on the situations and perhaps also come up with good recommendations to Indonesian policymakers, Indonesian governments, how we can contribute to the advancements of peace in that regions. I wish you again a productive discussions. I'm really sorry I cannot join for the whole discussions because I have other engagements. But I will for sure take a look at the recordings of our discussion this morning, and we'll learn a lot from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, for your opening remarks. So, very good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. Thank you for coming to CSIS, both of you who are in person here in the auditorium, and also those who are joining us online. So, welcome to join CSIS and EI seminar, or hybrid seminar, as we call it these days, where we look into the recent developments of the Russia-Ukrainian war and whether or not it will lead to a stalemate, or what endgame are we going to see. So we now know that the Russia-Ukrainian war has gone to its 8 months, if I'm not mistaken. It started in 24th of February, 2022. And in the past couple of months, we see that there's the dynamics between Russia, Ukraine, and those who are involved within the conflict and the war are changing in a very fast and a very swift way. There are developments on the use of weaponry, on politics, on social level, on economic level, and that the impact is so broad that I can just speak for a day just to list out all of this impacts. But unfortunately, I don't have much of a time in that, but I am joined with four, and also with me as well, Ambassador Vasil Hamyanin of the Ukraine here. So 5, I suppose. Very expert individuals that will share their knowledge on various perspectives and issues surrounding the Russo-Ukrainian war. And so we are very lucky to have all of you here, ladies and gentlemen. And I think I don't want to steal the limelight, and I quite notice the time. And before, if I could ask all of our panelists here, before I can jump into the panel session by introducing you, may I invite Ambassador Vasil Hamyanin to provide a brief remarks and context in regards with the Russo-Ukrainian war. So if it's all right, Ambassador Vasil Hamyanin.
Selamat pagi.
Please, you have the floor.
Yeah.
Please, you have the floor.
Is it all right?
All right, we're just going to set up the camera to yours. Okay, that's good.
I'm looking at you or the camera?
You please look at the camera.
Okay. Well, I'll try. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really grateful and honored to be present in this room today. And I'm grateful to CSIS leadership and the experts who agreed to accept me like a brief introduction speaker. I would not be talking that much, and I apologize in advance that yes, today I just received a very urgent appointment call, so I have to leave. Perhaps I'll try to be able to come back before 12 o'clock, to finalize everything. It will be great, and I really appreciate the topic of this briefing. This is, I think, the best one I've seen through the last months. Stalemate or endgame. That will be the real a tough point to discuss, because it will be interesting. I'm like a person that had academic background, and I did my PhD in world history, actually history of China in more than the first half of 20th century, which was the time for Indonesia too, and for the whole world, time of changes and time of challenges. My key point here, whatever you do, whatever you try to analyze, whatever you try to predict, you always have to go back to history. You always go to dig deep, And you always have to find out the roots of the problem, not just the upper side. You have to see what is hidden beneath the ground. Otherwise, we'll be just, it's like a human body catching a virus or something, and then it causes headache, and you just take painkillers, and you don't kill the virus, and you take painkillers, eventually you die. Same story about the, like a tree, yeah? If roots are damaged, you can do anything above the ground, but it will lead to the death of a tree. That's why it's very clever. It was very clever remark, and I thank you very much for that. That we have to look at the causes of this war. I would prefer to call it Russian aggression, because it's not Russian-Ukrainian war. It's not like, two countries fighting, just, conflict and all that. It's different in nature, because what happened actually, Russia confronted and confronts the world order, democracy, justice, international laws, UN charters, all things and principles we value. And if we just discuss the consequences of that, like crisis, and then we try to take measures to resolve the crisis, the food crisis, the energy crisis, logistic crisis, etc., economic, financial crisis, we have to think about the crisis of trust and the crisis of diplomacy, of global diplomacy, first of all. And then we go back to the roots, and we go back to backgrounds and find out why this brutal attack was possible. And what shall we do to put it to an end as soon as possible? Because no one in this world would love to this war, this aggression to continue forever. However, I would say it very, very directly, very straight, put it very straight. If we just repeat, we don't like the war and we want peace and we want to stop the war, nothing will happen. We have to identify the targets, we have to identify the roots of the problem, and we have to identify the instruments and methods, measures to be taken to stop it, really, like nib it in the bud, right? Not just take painkillers to make world feel a little bit better, but not for long. The longer the aggression lasts, the more severe and dangerous the consequences would be for the world economy, for the world food supply systems, for the world logistics, and for the world finance, and for everything, actually. That's why we really have to work hard to identify the problems, the roots of the problems. Put it in other words, if Russia stops the war, it will be the end of the war. If Ukraine stops the war, it will be the end of Ukraine, basically. This is formula which will makes it impossible for us and for the civilized world to sit down and hold peace talks on the conditions of Russian aggressor. Because if we sit down now on the conditions and like following the demand, respecting the demands of Russian Federation, this will be frozen conflict for maybe decades, and this will not lead to anything else. And provided the brutality of Russian army on the Ukrainian territory, and knowing what they did on the occupied territories to our people, I will not repeat this. I did it many times. We feel pain every day for those who stay still under occupation. And finally, I would say that, well, it's direct comparison. Maybe I would like to take here. I repeat, I'm a bit of historian, right? So I'm still now rereading the books about the beginning of the Second World War, how it happened and what happened, and how what were the reasons, and how Hitler justified the Anschluss of Austria, attack on Czech Republic, attack on Poland, etc. And I see that the history is repeating itself, just like 99%. And now I'm asking myself and asking everybody globally, how would you feel if in like 1944, Hitler would be invited somewhere like to League of Nations and say, you know, guys, let's talk, let's be nice, don't do this, like let's negotiate peace talks and that, because, you know, world is suffering. Can anyone imagine this? If not, my next question is, why are we trying to you know, to protect Putin's face and try to, you know, persuade ourselves that this is not the second Hitler, it's not a threat to the world. One man is threatening the world, blackmailing the world with starvation, with nuclear weapons, with everything else, energy crisis, will freeze Europe to death, will freeze Ukraine to death. One man giving orders of destroying Ukrainian energy, civilian objects of infrastructure. People are suffering. One man is guilty of, not one, but many of them, but I mean, just one man giving orders is guilty of hundreds of thousands of deaths of civilians. One man is trying to persuade the world that if anything, he will use nuclear weapons and just contaminate half of the world. And the world is still tolerating these people in the United Nations Security Council and in G20 and in other, you know, authoritative and respected fora and gatherings. This is something that not me only, but many people would not understand, because it's clear, one, if you negotiate with a terrorist, the terrorist will repeat what he did, one and again and again and again. And if it is a political and global political terrorist, this will not only be repeated by him towards the others, but this will be a very good precedent and example for the other terrorists who are now, being cautious and hesitative. Don't dare to do this. But if we make him do what he does and just tolerate this and say, okay, anything, but don't this or this or this, this will be the end of the world as we know it, you know. Sorry to cite this song. Thank you very much. I took a lot of your time, but I really appreciate the topic is great, and I made a lot of comments on that already, but I will love to watch the presentation in recording after that. Thank you very much, everybody, and good luck, and please have a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Vasil Amyani. A very strong statement, and also please give a round of applause. I am remiss, however, to mention about your short biography, if I may, just very shortly. I mean, I know that you have a PhD that was in 2001 on Oriental Studies in National Academy of Science, and Ambassador Hamyanin has joined the Foreign Service in 2002 in Ukraine and has occupied various postings across East Asia, such as in China before, and you've been posted here in Indonesia since 2020. So again, I'd like to thank you very much, Ambassador, for you being here physically present and also providing us with a direct statement and also perspectives on the war, conflict, and aggression created by Russia in Ukraine. So again, I cannot thank you enough for that. Sami, thank you so much. So allow me to go straight into then the panel session. But before then, I would like to read just a short biography of all the four speakers that I have today, starting with, we have Dr. Riccardo Alcaro. Dr. Alcaro is the first and foremost a research coordinator and head. Please, thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you. Is a research coordinator and head of the Global Actors Program at EI. His main area of expertise is on transatlantic relations, with a special focus on the United States and European policies and Europe surrounding regions. Dr. Riccardo Alcaro holds a summa cum laude PhD from the University of Tübingen. And then on Dr. Giulio Pugliese. Dr. Pugliese is a senior fellow of Asia Pacific, also at EI, and he also is a lecturer in Japanese politics at the University of Oxford and a part-time professor of EU Asia Studies at the European University Institute. Dr. Giulio Pugliese holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge. So, buongiorno, benvenuti, welcome to Jakarta, gentlemen. And I'll continue on by reading a biography of Professor Dr. Evi Firiani. Professor Dr. Evi Firiani is a professor of international relations at Universitas Indonesia. She helped establish the master's program on studies at the university in 2003 and has been one of the peer group in the program. She has received more than 18 international grants and scholarships. Professor Firiani's research interests include Indonesia's foreign policy, ASEAN, Asian regionalism, Indonesia's relations with Australia, Indonesia-Malaysia relations, and various other areas. And last but not least, we have Andrew Mantong, who is a researcher here at CSIS Indonesia. Prior to joining in CSIS, Andrew served as the secretary of the undergraduate program at the Department of International Relations at Universitas Indonesia. His main research expertise include topics such as Indonesia's foreign policy, counterterrorism objectives, cyber politics, non-traditional security, state-society relations, and also ASEAN. So welcome as well to Andrew and Professor Dr. Evi Firiani. So we'll go ahead with the first speaker of today. It would be Dr. Riccardo Alcaro. Please, you have 12 to 15 minutes to present your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilang, and thank you again to CSIS for agreeing to host this event on the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its implications for not just Europe, but the world. And today specifically, we're going to speak of Asia, of course. I'd be remiss if I didn't start my remarks by bringing to CSIS official greetings from my institute, the International Affairs Institute in Rome's president and director, Ambassador Nelly Feroci, and director Natalie Tocci. CSIS and EI have been strengthening ties lately. We've been involved not just in the project which provides the occasion for this event, the joint project, but also other projects, including cooperation on the T20. Italy was the G20, chaired the G20 last year, Indonesia, of course, this year. So our hope is that we can move along this pattern and actually intensify our ties. Again, I am mandated, but also happy to re-emphasize that this event is taking place in the context of an EU-funded project, which is called Joint Understanding and Strengthening EU Foreign and Security Policy. So, which is carried out by a broad consortium of 14 partners from 12 different countries, including from extra-European countries, obviously Indonesia included. And so far, we've worked out the concept. We have done some work on public perceptions. We are now working on a number of case studies, including Ukraine, but also the South China Sea. And so we do invite you all to have a look at the website, jointproject.eu. I mean, one of the objectives of the project is to familiarize extra EU researchers and experts with EU foreign and security policy matters. But it is also to expose EU researchers to the perceptions, to the perspectives of non-EU experts, which is absolutely essential in terms of understanding how effective or ineffective EU foreign and security policy is. Now, EU foreign and security policy is obviously a hot topic in Europe, much less so outside of Europe. But the war in Ukraine has brought attention to Europe and to what the EU as an organization is doing and can do also outside of Europe. So we do hope to contribute to this debate outside of Europe through these events. Today, We will be discussing the implications of the Ukraine war for Europe and beyond, and for East Asia and Southeast Asia in particular. Myself not being an expert in Asian affairs, I mean, my task is that of giving you some context, and especially giving you, sharing with you my ideas about how this war will impact Europe. And then my colleagues and Indonesian friends will tell us more about what they think of this war and the potential consequences for the country, for the region. I guess we can speak of the war in two ways. We can speak of the actual war, so how it is going, what we can expect as an outcome of that, or we can take a step back and look at the whole thing from a broader perspective and consider the long-term implications of the war for the European order. And while I am absolutely ready to speak of the details of the war, what Putin's strategy seems to be, whether he will be using or not nuclear weapons, what kind of response the United States and the European countries would possibly put together, if that is indeed the case. I think it is more interesting to you to listen to some broader reflection, to get a larger narrative of how this war has changed Europe for good. So in I think we're gonna have a Q&A session later on. So all questions about the actual campaign, I mean, I'll be happy to answer as well. I mean, to the best of my abilities. But now I would really like to take a more academic view and speaking more in broader, more general terms. So the reality is that the war has no foregone conclusion. It may end in a Ukraine victory, which may be defined differently, but basically the least you can expect of a Ukraine victory is that Russian troops are pushed out of Ukraine territory, at least to the line they were holding before the invasion started on February 24 this year. Or the Ukraine war may end up in some sort of Russian victory, which again can be very differently defined, but basically it amounts to Russia keeping control of swathes of Ukrainian territory it didn't control before February 24th. Or the war can just go on stalemate, which is a realistic prospect, not necessarily, however, the most probable one. There are too many variables. But in order to understand how the war has changed Europe, you don't need to anticipate the end game of the war. Whether it is a Ukraine victory, whether it is a Russia victory, the most likely outcome is an order dominated by antagonism, structural, systemic antagonism between Russia, the European countries, and the United States. And I'm keeping naming the United States, bringing the US here, because the United States is a European power, and it is showing that in the sense that without US military support, we wouldn't have an independent Ukraine today. So whatever the outcome of the war, Europe's relations with Russia will remain deeply adversarial. The NATO-Russia border, and I would like to remind you that NATO has actually expanded as a consequence of the war. not so much to Ukraine, as Russia said, it could happen, but it would never have happened, but to two countries which traditionally have been neutral in their foreign policy approach, Sweden and Finland. And with that, we will be having a Russia military border in Europe, basically running from the Scandinavian peninsula down to the Black Sea and through a NATO armed Ukraine and partly Russian occupied Ukraine. The EU's approach to Russia will remain geared towards financial pressure and diplomatic isolation. The EU-Russia energy relationship, which was one of the probably the most important component of the relationship before the war, is going to basically disappear or to become near to irrelevant in the midterm. And US-Russia relations will remain adversarial, confrontational in nature in Europe and beyond. So for most EU countries, what the war has shown is that the security guarantees that the United States, and this is why I keep going back to the US, extends to European countries, both in the context of the NATO alliance, but also bilaterally. They've always been theoretically existential, especially for countries close to the border with Russia, but now they are practically existential in the sense that they are felt as what stands between an individual country's territorial integrity, even independence, and the possibility of an invasion and even conquest. This holds true, especially for the three small Baltic republics, which are militarily extremely difficult to defend, and as well as Poland, and increasingly so also even Finland. So these countries, and they are not the only ones, but certainly Poland and the Baltic states are the ones that feel they are most threatened by Russia's revisionism or Russia's aggressive foreign policy approach. They really feel the security guarantees extended by the US are existential in nature, and they probably are. So this has given new centrality to a factor that has always been present in Europe, but somehow had become less relevant after the end of the Cold War. And this is European dependence on American arms in order to defend their own territory, especially in this case, Central and Eastern European states. The need for the EU to reconfigure its energy supply away from Russia is a major shift. It's actually an epochal transformation of the European energy equation. And again, the European countries are looking at the United States and a number of countries with very strong ties with the United States as alternative sources of supply, especially gas supply, but not only that. The US is providing the Europeans with liquefied natural gas. Other countries such as Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, even Israel, will be providing the Europeans with more gas than they do now. And because these countries have a strong relationship with the United States, European countries will become more dependent on the United States and on its system of partnerships across the world more than they are now. Actually, up until the world, energy-wise, the Europeans were basically independent from the United States. Now they have become dependent on the United States and its alliances. As Joseph was saying, and I am really happy he mentioned that, the war is having broader effects at the global state, at the global level. And it is injecting or reinforcing a binary logic into international politics. You are either a partner of the United States or you are not. And this holds true especially for China and countries close to China. I mean, beyond Russia, of course. This means that European countries, which are already very close to the US for the security and energy dependencies I've just mentioned, will have fewer incentives than they have so far to pursue separate policies outside of Europe. And they will be more, I mean, the returns of a separate policy towards China or towards Iran have really decreased, and therefore the incentives are more in the direction of let's side with US foreign policy. So this just to complete the picture of how this war has made Europe has again put Europe's dependence on the United States, Europe's being part of a Euro-Atlantic system, hierarchically organized with the US on top, very much into sharp focus. Besides all this, the war has brought about an intra-EU power shift. Traditionally, Western Europe has dominated the EU, most notably Germany and the Franco-German partnership. And please, don't take me wrong. Germany and France, as well as Italy and the others, remain much richer than their counterparts in Central and Eastern Europe. So they will remain very much influential within the European Union. I'm not saying that they have become less powerful than Central and Eastern European countries, but Central and Eastern European countries, especially Poland and the Baltic states, are now more influential than they were before the war. So it's not a reversal of the balance of power, that's would absolutely nuts, but it is a relative rebalancing of power, because now you have this Eastern European member states which have coalesced around a central strategic imperative together with the northern, much richer European states, Finland, Sweden, but also Denmark. And so, and that strategic imperative is, of course, that of containing Russia and deterring Russia. So you have this northeast axis in the EU, which is foreign policy-wise much more strategically homogeneous than it was before the war, and therefore is capable of organizing consensus within the EU and be more influential than it was before February the 24th, not least because the northeast axis also has the support right now of the United States, because it is on these countries, as well as other countries along the eastern border of the EU, which the United States will be relying on in terms of organizing containment and deterrence of Russia, much more than countries in Central and Western Europe. Yeah, 2 minutes. And let's not forget the northeast axis within the EU also provides a country which is no longer in the EU, the United Kingdom, an avenue to get back into the European security chessboard. And because the UK's foreign policy choices after Brexit have been limited to basically being a very strongly committed American partner, this war has increased the incentives and the appeal of being a partner of the United States, and therefore the UK will have some more influence than it would have had if the war had not happened on European security matters. And that will impact somehow, even if indirectly, the European Union. But how will it impact that? How is this increased dependence on the United States going to impact the EU? This might seem counterintuitive, but the reality is that European integration, which especially in the 90s and early 2000s, but also in the 2010s, was seen as sort of an alternative to, was seen as having as entailing an inherent tension with the European partnership with the United States, is less so now. Because in fact, European integration is fully compatible with the competitive the economic consequences of the war. So EU integration may still advance, but would not necessarily bring to a situation in which the European Union is more autonomous foreign policy-wise. It may be more cohesive, more integrated, actually stronger, but not necessarily more autonomous, because all this European integration we could see in the near future would still be a function of European dependence, of European increased dependence on the United States. I just need 1 minute more to complete the picture. This scenario of a more integrated but less autonomous European Union is a realistic one, but it's not a given. There are 3 fundamental variables that may change the future. The first one is what happens in Russia. I mean, we do not have any credible evidence of a change in Russia being close, actually on the contrary. But we could, I mean, wars do have the capacity, the ability to change conventional wisdom and to make what seems impossible possible, what seems possible likely. So we cannot exclude that one day Russia will change its foreign policy stance. And if that happens, the European order would again be possible to look at the European order as organized, not so much along a balance of military power pattern, but in terms of common institutions and common rules and shared practices. The second variable is that the EU could actually fail to integrate, even though there is a strong structural demand. This structural demand needs to be converted into political consensus, and political consensus is much harder to achieve than experts and academics at times, especially experts, foreign policy think tankers would like to believe. So the EU could actually fail to generate the necessary resources to face the consequences of the war. And if that happens, Europe's order would be much more volatile than it could. And the third and most important variable, because we are going to have a taste of that very soon, is what happens in the United States. So what happens in Russia, what happens in the EU, what happens in the United States. The prospect of a more integrated EU and still a transatlantically committed EU is very much real if the US administration continues the Atlanticist line the Biden administration has been pursuing. But we cannot be certain of that, especially if Trump, an avowed skeptic of the transatlantic relationship, or someone like him becomes president in early 2025. And given that the Republicans are on the ascendancy, this variable is very much the one I would I would urge you to keep in mind first.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. Very elusive statements as well in regarding with condition dynamics in Ukraine itself, and also how it affects the European politics, whether it's domestic and also its foreign policy, and the increasing dependency on the United States, especially in energy, is something that I might be remiss for you not to tell us here in the audience. And I think it's very telling how the energy crisis has put a grip into the European day-to-day politics and also society life. So thank you for that remarks. I will now continue to our second speaker of the panel, Dr. Giulio Pugliese. Please, you may have the screen. Oh, sorry, the floor. Or
Yes.
both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gilang. It's a pleasure to be here. And for the sake of timekeeping, I'll keep my remarks short, and hopefully we will delve more into it during the Q&A session, depending on your interests. My topic reflects my expertise, which is really on East Asian international politics. And I will look specifically at how the European Union and its member states have actually broadened their strategic horizons, notwithstanding the war in Ukraine, because it has and will have a major impact. Because yes, there has been unanimous consensus in promoting a European strategic, EU strategic compass, according to which the threat assessment has been largely endorsed within the Union. And there are also similarities with NATO's new strategic concept in terms of geopolitical assessment and the priority assigned to the neighborhood. But since at least 2016, since the global strategy, the European Union has emerged as a global strategic player. And this has been evidenced, of course, by the European strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, which has been churned out at the European Council in spring of 2021, and then undersigned by a joint communication in September of the same year. So my topic really in a nutshell would be of the implications of the war in Ukraine, for Europeans' engagement, the Union's and its member states' engagement in the Indo-Pacific. And I will focus specifically on the maritime security component, because of course it's, I guess, of more interest as well. It's of deep interest also to by the Arc of Freedom and Prosperity of 2006 and 2007. And that concept, that strategic concept, was churned out by the very same diplomatic and security team that was reinstated as key and playing a central role during late Abe Shinzo's comeback in 2012. They've tried to churn out different concepts, strategic concepts along the same lines. And they finally found eager ears in the Trump administration, which essentially both, starting with the policy planning staff at the State Department in late 2017, both Japan's strategic concept altogether. This is the first time, by the way, that the United States appropriates a strategic concept from an allied country. It's really a testimony to Japan's clever diplomacy. But what I emphasize here is that it had a strong power political component, especially in the American version of the strategy for Indo-Pacific. And this has created problems of reception in East Asia, where the concept had eventually been received in 2019 as an outlook, ASEAN outlook for the Indo-Pacific, following Japan's reassurances to Southeast Asian players that this was a vision, not a strategy, and that this was inclusive, not exclusive, to make a long story short. But Europe still had reservations, so it took the leadership of France, which have active stakes in the region as a resident power with about 1.5, 1.8 million citizens across the Indo-Pacific, defined from the eastern coast of Africa to the western Pacific, but also has active maritime stakes in, as it is the second largest detainer of the exclusive economic zones of the area. What is interesting is that Germany and the Netherlands then appropriated the concept along their same definition by the end of 2020. But this was a way to redefine the Indo-Pacific concept in more inclusive terms as well, along the tripartite axis of the European Union's outlook towards China, according to which China is a strategic competitor, is a strategic rival, a competitor, but also a potential partner to address transnational security and transnational issues, transnational security threats and transnational issues. So what is interesting here, and it's the point I'd like to drive in for today's presentation, is that the European Union and some of its key member states define the Indo-Pacific along a third way, but tries to cut across the fault lines of US-China competition to be and to act in defense of the global commons, of customary law, but to avoid also the action-reaction dynamics, because there is a full recognition that there are power political hard deterrency components, according to which some of the instruments aimed at implementing the US Indo-Pacific approach are aimed not at empowering regional players, but really at seeing them as proxies or objects rather than subjects in their own. So the interesting thing I like to drive, the conclusion, you could say it's a provocative one. I think this is what the French government actually tries to emphasize, is that there is potentially a third way. And perhaps at the very end, I will explore how the war in Ukraine is actually impacting on this approach, how also Europe's hardening views on China are impacting on this approach. So I'll give you some examples specific to maritime security engagement. The European Union and its member states have been spelled out a maritime security component in their Indo-Pacific strategy. This is unusual. And there are three key parts. One is naval presence. The second one is promotion of norms and defense of international law. And the third one is capacity building. Naval presence refers to this coordinated maritime presence operations in Europe's near abroad, really. So the Gulf of Guinea, but also the Horn of Africa and beyond. So the European Union has expanded its remit for coordinated maritime presence operations in the northwestern Indian Ocean. What is interesting about that is that it's aimed at countering piracy and transnational security threats, terrorism, but also now increasingly at securing sea lanes. And there is a potential triangulation, whereas the coordination with big Asian players such as South Korea or even Japan in Operation Atalanta can be replicated in the northwestern Indian Ocean, because of course, following the war in Ukraine, there is an interest in securing sea lines of communication of the Gulf. So that could actually, that alignment of planets of that alignment of economic and hence security interests can bring in powerful Asian nations along with their navies, along with European navies, in acting in terms of coordinated maritime presence in the Western Indian, in the northwestern Indian Ocean. And of course, there is a lot of there are also French territories and maritime exclusive economic zones to keep in mind there. The second one has to do with member states' presence operations and military signaling across the Indo-Pacific, from well beyond the Western Indian Ocean, and so from the Eastern Indian Ocean all the way to the West Pacific. Whereas you see French warships, German warships like such as the Bayern or aircraft being sent to send a signal, but that signal is not really a signal of deterrence. It's a signal, and this is reinforcing my earlier point, it's a signal aimed at buttressing the customary law of the seas in favor of freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. What happens is that, as far as I know, because much of this is, of course, top secret and has to do with, of course, military information. As far as I know, there is no such thing as freedom of navigation operations, but there are operations in defense of freedom of navigation, which is a different thing. So there is no such thing as crossing the 12 nautical miles of these geographic features in the South China Sea, for instance. But there are these presence operations that are aimed at showcasing that the South China Sea is international waters. What is less known is that many of these assets by individual European state members have military officers from other European navies on board. So that gives it a European dimension. This is the military, this is the presence operation side. What is interesting is that, again, you can see the difference between a more deterrent-prone approach and a more military, a harder military edge, which prizes intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance, but also going through the 12 nautical miles, which might heighten tensions, which is the US approach. And to some extent, you see that replicated also with the UK and AUKUS, and the approach of key European players and European member states. This is my analysis, and please correct me if you think I am mistaken. I'm very happy to take criticism, and I never take it personally, actually, as a constructive aspect. And of course, the interest in defending the customary law and UNCLOS has been buttressed by note verbals at the United Nations in defense of the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling between on the South China Sea, and really between the disputes between China and the Philippines, and is part and parcel also of the activities of the European Union and its key member states in training and developing soft skills through training courses and whatnot, also at the ASEAN EU level or at the ASEAN and individual state member level, to transfer knowledge on the so-called law of the seas and international law. So this is, again, it's part and parcel of the same. But the capacity building has gone beyond that particular capacity building. So to conclude with the third point, piracy, of course, has been rampant in the region, along with maritime terrorism, and this has been dominant. This is evident, of course, in Indonesia with the Sulu and Sulawesi seas, and they remain at the forefront of regional concerns. But then what has happened is that these threats and these challenges have been compounded by maritime and territorial claims spurring up, specifically the militarization of these claims, notably by China's assertiveness, if not aggressiveness, in the region. And so Southeast Asian coast guards have been positioning themselves as the interface that signals a concern to avoid the systematic use of force in unannounced encounters at sea, in order to keep the intruder, quote unquote, within the bounds of proportionate actions. The problem is that, of course, if Coast Guard's ships have been militarized, as have been fishing flotillas and paramilitary troops, it's very hard to have a clear picture of how to best to cope with these challenges. So what external actors have been doing in that domain, starting with Japan and the United States, is that they have tried to maintain stability also by increasing transparency at sea. And so we get the specific example of capacity building specific to maritime domain awareness. And the European Union, maybe it's less known, has emphasized maritime domain awareness through the Crimario project. It's a monitoring tool for securing maritime domain, to exchange information also through a platform. This is the IORIS platform, to Coast Guard agencies in the South, in Southeast Asia, littoral states and whatnot. I will try to conclude by cutting a long story short, by emphasizing the differences I see, and I might be mistaken, with the incoming tool that has been promoted by the Quad countries in April of this year, which is the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Tool. It's still a work in progress, but clearly this rests on American technology, potentially more intrusive. I'm an academic, so I like to speak frankly. Potentially much more interested in the aforementioned goals of using this tool to get a clearer picture of sea assets that are not just of the aimed at illegal fishing, because nominally the maritime domain awareness tool of the Indo-Pacific is aimed at illegal fishing. It's not just aimed at illegal fishing, of course, it's aimed at the paramilitary troops, at the Chinese military flotilla, but also potentially at warships. Okay, so clearly you see a potential difference between one tool that is aimed more at maritime domain awareness of transnational threats such as terrorism, piracy, and also, of course, of the China challenge, broadly defined, and one that is squarely interested in fact, at competing with China. What the Ukraine, with parentheses and conclusions, what the Ukraine war has brought to Europe in this regard is a degree of strategic dependency rather than autonomy. So, in line with what Riccardo has said just earlier, we depend much more on the US for our own security. This elicits, of course, a change of our political calculations also with regard to our assessment of the China challenge. But of course, our views on China have hardened. The European External Action Services has mentioned that we should move towards looking at China squarely as a strategic competitor. And then, of course, what will happen in all likelihood is that there will be a division of labor, because these maritime presence operations far away are expensive. Division of labor where Europe perhaps takes greater care of its near abroad. And I'll conclude here. And sorry for being the over-loquacious Italian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giulio, for the enlightening remarks on the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, specifically on the maritime presence, expanded maritime presence. I note that you mentioned in your remarks on the agreeable expansion of the EU Atalanta, Operation Atalanta, from the Horn of Africa into northwestern Indian Ocean, which, if I remember correctly from your article, constitutes the lowest common security denominator for all the EU, 27 EU member states. And also it ties very nicely to what Riccardo mentioned before in regards to the increasing dependency of liquid natural gas import from the Gulf states, and also that traverses the Persian Gulf, Oman Sea, towards the Bab el Mandeb, all the way to the Mediterranean, which I think is agreeable to all 27 EU member states. So I think it ties in very nicely. And also you complement it well with the increasing transparency initiative of Crimario to expand the maritime domain awareness by all the Indo-Pacific countries. And we're hopefully that the Crimario will also be expanded not only in the Indian Ocean, but also towards the Pacific Ocean in the near future. So thank you. Thank you very much for that inline remark. So we'll move forward for the third speaker. We have Professor Dr. Evi Firiani of Universitas Indonesia. Evi, please, you may have the floor and the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilang. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to participate in this important discussion as we talk a very important issue in the world today and impact for almost all people in the world now. Being one of the speakers after Riccardo and Giulio, if I may, will see the war from Indonesia, from faraway country located in Asia, and may not be seen close to the Russia or Ukraine, but indeed we have been experiencing the impact of the war since the first day, especially because Indonesia is the chairman of G20 this year, and how this discussion on the summit and who attend the summit already hit the discussion on in the media and also in the academic world. I very much enjoy and take a lot of notes on the insights from given by Riccardo and Giulio about the situation in also from the ambassador about situation in Ukraine, and also how its impact on the EU and EU relation also with Asia Pacific. I would like to enrich our discussion with 3 points. First, the significance of Ukraine on our understanding of the neo-realist thought, and the second about who benefited actually from the war, because it will then be able to answer the question from the ambassador and also from Riccardo when the war ends. And the third is on the role of other countries outside the major powers in this role, including the role of Indonesia. I will talk very quickly from the first one. The war in Ukraine has taken place for over nine months now, and it has caused thousands of casualties, destruction of the cities in the impacted areas, and also grievances in many places. As we know, in regional and global level, the war has also worsened the economic and health crisis that had been impacted from the pandemics. Yose mentioned about this, the scar effect of the pandemic has not been solved, but now we have to face another negative impact on the world economic. And it also created additional food and energy crisis. But Jose also mentioned about it. We all seen this as the worst and darkest impact of major countries' power games. However, this war reveals that offensive and defensive countries is not definite, as offensive countries like Russia has to defend itself as war prolonged. And we have seen in the media how Russian also get problem on this. Offensive strategy also create negative impact on the offending countries and elites. So rather than gaining popular support at home, elites like President Putin just built a negative sentiment. On another side, the Ukraine war showed that defensive country like Ukraine can survive as it has been defended by other major countries. And we have seen in media, and also the ambassador already mentioned, without the support of Western countries, including the United States, Ukraine is not there anymore. So rather than being a weak side in the war, Ukraine has been able to fight back and attack the Russian troops in the front. Ukraine has also managed to bear the war for months, survive, and indicate some prospect of survival. but it very much depends on the support from the US and the NATO. And we have also heard from Riccardo that how actually not only Ukraine, but also EU very much now depend on the Ukraine strategically. How can we learn what lesson we can learn from this phenomenon? First, I would like to see that neoliberal offense and defense debate is false, because defensive and offensive countries are not the ones who determine the war result, but other major powers do. As the war progresses, we can see the US and NATO control the war, not Russia. Putin did start the war in Ukraine, but other countries actually created. The second, the war has united the Western countries, not also united, but also create now dependency, strategy between the EU and the United States. So I would like to highlight these first points. The second point, as the war progresses, we need now to think who benefited actually from the war and how can the war end it. The war has created devastating impacts for Ukraine and demolished physical infrastructure of the countries, as we see from the media. But the war has also expanded negative sentiment toward Russia and President Putin domestically and internationally. Russia also has to bear severe economic damage and enormous social and political cost of its offensive behaviors. Who are actually benefit from the result of the war? Absolutely, it is not Russia. And if we see in the media and reports, the first who can benefit is United States because of the energy crisis. And we have known that EU have make a deal with United States to differentiate its dependence on EU, and Riccardo's point very much show this. And with the price of energy much higher, 4 times from the energy price of Russian gas. So we see this in terms of economic benefit, the war actually benefit the US very much. The second, in terms of military industries, Ukraine has received so much support, but not in terms of money, but in terms of armories. And where it's come from? It's from the Western military complex. So who are the one get benefit from the war? Actually, the war military complex in the American and European countries. Without this war, the industry may have to collapse and close. But with this war and maybe prospective war in other part of the world, they continue to produce. So now we know who benefit from the war. From this understanding, then we know how can we end the war if there are some countries benefited from that, because this war already bring so much material benefit from the one who rich in energy and also the one who rich in military complex. So if you ask about when the war will end, then you have to pursue these countries. And I'm not sure it will end soon, because United States definitely need more and more economic benefit to resolve its so deep deficit badly. And the third point is the role of other countries. I have seen there is no rule for small countries and even medium countries like Indonesia. And there is no rule of the international law. Who carried international law when the major powers argue about because they know that they could get benefit from any conflict in the world. So this is a negative, I think, negative news for the people who seek for the peaceful solution of the world. And the secondly, international institutions like United Nations, G20, ASEAN, EU have failed to find solution also for this kind of conflict. Instead of providing solution, it seems those countries even have been brought into the countries, into the conflicts, and have to take sides and to some extent support some of the dominating powers. So international institution has also no rules in this conflict. If we see this, we can analyze that the domination of power games in international relations is very still dominant. So it's still same with the First World War, the Second World War, and now what the world we have is actually number different from we have seen in centuries ago, still in the dominating by major powers through power relations. And country like Indonesia will have to find its way not to be squeezed to take sides, or but still also maintain interest. And I think we can see from what have been done by President Joko Widodo for G20, and looking at the last development on the G20 preparation of G20 summit, I'm quite pessimistic that we can do something on this. The second of this point, I would like to take the impact of the war to Asia. We have observed this war quite closely because there are a lot of analysis try to connect what Russian did with what may be done by China. So as if what happened with Russia in Ukraine war will also become incentive or disincentive for China. This is quite astonishing because compare Russia and China in some way may be relevant, but I think China have its own different relation with its neighbors in Asia rather than with Russia and its neighbor in Eastern Europe. There have been some relation and close connection between China and ASEAN and also countries in Central Asia through the Shanghai Cooperation, especially in ASEAN, not only in terms of G2G relation, China and ASEAN also have relation in non-state actors relation. But comparing Russia and China and see whatever happened in Ukraine that may also impact on China relation with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and Russia, ASEAN also reveal to us that how Western strategic thoughts has been dominated with also strategy of difference to China. I would like to stop here, and I hope these 3 points will provoke a further discussion for our today. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Evi, for your remarks and also enlightening us with how the Russia-Ukrainian war would impact the region, and the various multilateral institutions that you mentioned does not have the adequate rules to try to contain and also to stop the conflicts from expanding further, and also highlighting us on who actually might benefit this ongoing war. And it has been noted by not just all 4 of us, 5 of us here, but also we see that in 2022, a record number of profits have been recorded by energy companies from across the world, even though, and this has also drawn criticisms from some world leaders that are trying to impose some windfall tax to try and disseminate some of those excessive profits by them because of the ongoing energy crisis. And also the benefits in regards to military industrial complex is also it's a classical tale, I think, in regards with war and military. I think you know, the old adage of si vis pacem para bellum, you know, you have to prepare to have peace, you have to prepare for war, rings very loudly in this context. So thank you very much, Professor Evi, for that enlightening and also highlighting those issues. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Andrew Mantong, to provide his remarks. So please, Andrew, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Gilang. I think it would be easy for me to become the last speaker because everything has been covered by the previous speakers. But I would like to highlight one of the most important things that probably our European colleagues have shared to us, that after the war, probably the most defining features of the European security is the strategic dependency of supplies and military supports from the United States. And this is very striking for me because I'm going to be speaking from the lens of Indo-Pacific and ASEAN on the impact of Ukraine war to the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN. And I would begin by saying that ASEAN has always celebrated the notion of maintaining strategic autonomy. And given to today's questions of wars, this would make a very striking comparison between what is going on and what would become the scenario for the Indo-Pacific as well as ASEAN. I will begin by highlighting some contextual features of what is going on in the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN. How do we perceive the Ukraine war, and as well as to discuss at least two impacts. And I will divide impacts by two categories. The first is direct impact, and the second is indirect impact, which probably leads to different but also interrelated specific policy questions. With regards to the contextual features of how the ASEAN countries and Indo-Pacific countries see the wars, we have to remember that Indo-Pacific is the central point of the current great power competition. Why? Because the rise of China. China is discussed now as already becoming the regional power and global power, and we have also seen how the regional countries react to that. We have witnessed some historical Japan rearmament now. We have also witnessed some increased sales of weaponry and military hardware to Taiwan and South Korea. We have witnessed also the rise of unilateral trend with the establishment of AUKUS and the Quad. And this also already challenging for ASEAN, who always maintain the strategic autonomy. And we also have to bear our mind that there are some regional flashpoints in the region. We have seen that in the past few months, North Korea has increased missile and nuclear tests, and the cross-strait relations has becoming much more uncertain. And it started already, it even started before the war in Ukraine in February 2022. It started with the China's incursions to Taiwan Addis, and some military, including Indonesia, have already begun some discussion and scenarios discussion on how possible China military accession to the Taiwan territory may happen in the future. There are prolonged and stalled progress on the COC thanks to the pandemic, which also hampered the progress of the negotiation on the Code of Conduct over South China Sea. And I would like to argue that the Myanmar crisis also continues to show the limits of regional crisis management and normative pressure from the international community in the era of geopolitics revenge. So we have these flashpoints, but also we have some deep-seated trend on cooperation that would also probably becoming more insightful if we compare European and ASEAN experience here. Before the war and even before the great power competition lexicon comes into international relations, we have European Union and ASEAN. Both are leading example of regionalism and regional cooperation. You used to talk about EU enlargement after the Cold War, and ASEAN after the Cold War also used to talk about becoming the driver's seat of regional cooperation by existing ASEAN-led mechanism and so on and so forth. We discussed about in ASEAN centrality, etc. But we are also differed on two most important things. There is no NATO in Asia Pacific, and there are differences on how global values such as democracy and liberalism perceived in this region. There are also differences, I would like to argue, on how open economies are managed and how disadvantaged people and segment in society, which also translate to nationalism, deal with the globalization and regionalism. And this context provides some sort of differences on how we see the war in Ukraine. With regards to the impact of the war on Ukraine, I would like to highlight at least two impacts. The first is direct. The direct impact of the war in Ukraine to this region is mostly economics, and these economics effect have prompted some responses. Like, for example, President Jokowi visit to Ukraine and Russia in the past few months. And there are also some indirect impacts, mostly mirroring impact or structural impact to this region, and those also leads to different policy questions. On the on the direct impact, I think it's becoming mostly economics. First, there are some disruption on export activities and finance. There are some restriction of movement of ships in the Black Sea that already add some related expenses for shipping and others related export activities. And sanctions of Russian banks also to access the SWIFT banking system have become some sort of disruption for this region. Countries like India, for example, have suffered the pending incoming payments to Russia. And on the top of that, there are some issues related to the post-pandemic recovery and the surge of price. The most concerning features of the war is the rising of the commodity prices, which already felt mainly by net importers such as Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. It also has been followed by the price inflation, for example, in Thailand to the level of 11% in March, last March. The fear of stagflation also dominates our political economy discourse now. There are, of course, rise in commodity prices, which translate in the region to a low level of purchasing power. So it has been becoming more challenging for the regional countries, which are categories among the low and middle income countries. And higher domestic prices also mean a larger fiscal burden for countries, and this already led to some protectionist policy. For example, recently India is banning wheat export and Malaysia is banning on chicken exports, which has been consequential for countries like Singapore. And the government, like Indonesian government, also has to afford more subsidies due to the rising price of fuel because of the war, and it has been met by serious contentious politics. Major demonstrations has sparked on the streets of Jakarta, and the government has increasingly put in a difficult position about continuing subsidies or maintaining their fiscal health in the era of pandemic recovery. That would become the direct impact, at least mostly economic. And there are some indirect impact for these wars, and they are mostly security and revolves around the questions of China. There are at least three important questions. Is China inspired by the attack that has been done by Russia on Ukraine? And does similar asymmetrical features between great power and lesser power, like between Russia and Ukraine, will lead to the same consequences in the region? And will also, this is more theoretical question, will structural change or order remaking be beneficial for developing countries? There are some also questions of how countries like Indonesia, middle power countries, and rising power may deal with such situation, and this would become much more illustrative in how ASEAN respond to war. On the mirroring effect questions, military, as I mentioned before, has already discussed scenarios of which regional flashpoint can turn into an open war. It already started when China made some incursions to Taiwan Addis, and people are trying now to make some parallelism between Taiwan and Ukraine. There are some similarities. Both are democracies, and both have to deal with a more powerful, quote-unquote, authoritarian government. And these are the similarities between what Taiwan has and Ukraine has. But we also have to understand that China is probably facing different incentives, different structural constraints. China has never ruled out the options to use force if necessary to achieve reunification with Taiwan. But some experts believe in the region that military actions remains unlikely. mostly we would like we may probably seen some increases in military exercises and so on and so forth, but some experts still believe that military actions remain unlikely due to differences in geographical context. Taiwan is a separated islands with a with different geography topology, which also leads to different operational questions on how an invasion can be conducted if Beijing decides to unify the mainland and Taiwan. And we also have to understand that even the US acknowledged that all Chinese on the other side of the Taiwan Strait maintain a single country. So many countries are still committed to one China policy, and this already creates some sort of normative constraints of either regional countries as well as China on how regional and structural consequences can unfold should the invasion happen. On the South China Sea, there are also some questions, albeit not as urgent as the one on Taiwan issues, that will also China perform some similar move. And with regards to the current progress of the COC, now we are thinking that probably there would be some limitation of what ASEAN can achieve later, and how this limitation can be continued in terms of stability. So the regional countries now are facing the questions of how direct is the impact of the geopolitical revenge to the regional security arrangement. Will ASEAN believe on the dialogue and diplomacy be reliable given these new trends? Which bring me to my last point on structural effect. We can see the structural effect at least from the ASEAN response to the war. When the war happened in Ukraine, Southeast Asia countries' position are quite varied, ranging from Singapore's condemnation, imposing sanctions against Russia, to even the position of Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar by becoming abstain in some UN occasions. If we look at the ASEAN Foreign Minister's statement on the situation in Ukraine, we can highlight that ASEAN foreign ministers are deeply concerned over the situation and call on all relevant parties to exercise maximum restraint. So there are still some high belief on the maximum restraint and make utmost efforts to pursue dialogue and seek a peaceful resolution. So this is a dialogue and peaceful resolution always becoming the bedrock of ASEAN belief on how security should be achieved, and this continued to shape ASEAN responses, diplomatic response to the war. What we can learn from this response is there are normative statements that reflect the long-standing ASEAN belief on dialogue and neutrality, which also corresponds to the fact that ASEAN converged on the fact that each ASEAN nation will seek to maintain strategic autonomy. But it is also informs that why it varies, why there are some variation. It is also informs that ASEAN first has different political system, different interests, and different political inclination, and it has always been challenging to maintain some sort of notion of ASEAN, for example, centrality or ASEAN unity. And with regards to the balance of power and regional order, we can also see on how ASEAN is divided. ASEAN has some of ASEAN countries has only issued some sort of lukewarm statements condemning Russia's invasion. Even some countries like Indonesia will condemn the action, but not naming Russia for doing the attack. Divided on this also has illustrated some sort of division within ASEAN with regards to major geopolitical questions like Ukraine war, Myanmar crisis, or even China. We have to also remember that Russia is the largest arms exporter to ASEAN, although most transport goes to Vietnam. And Myanmar, being the pariah in the regional community after the coup now, is also seeking to boost ties with Myanmar to deal with the regional demonstrants. And this also create some sort of challenges of ASEAN. If the war happens in Taiwan, for example, how ASEAN can maintain strategic unity, how sort of ASEAN way can be translated further into much more tactical and operational level of cooperation between, let's say, ASEAN maritime apparatus or ASEAN defense apparatus. And also, I would also have to add some little notes on the public opinion. There are some experts and public opinion, at least here in Indonesia, who continuously express their support to Russia, even attending some of the Russian led discussion, track to discussion. What I can say about this is it reflects the long-standing dissatisfaction to the international order led by the US, to the hypocrisy of, for example, use of force performed by the US before, especially during the war on terror era. And it also reflects some of the experts' belief that a crisis might open some opportunities. But on top of that, we have a direct impact, which is economics. And for countries like ASEAN, who always think that economies constitute the most important reference object for their survival, this also becoming challenging. And military questions, security question can come after that. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew, for providing us with a brief, with a remarks on the position in regards with ASEAN's member states and also their perspectives in the Russo-Ukrainian war, especially also with how Indonesia and most of its public civil society views the war, and also how they, most of us do have their support behind Russia. And thank you for the explanation. And also, I'd like to highlight on the fact that it is difficult, I suppose, to try to comprehend the dynamics and policies of Asian countries, especially Southeast Asian countries, through the lens of the Western discourse, because of what has been said by Andrew on how we perceive on various things in a very different way, such as we don't have a collective defense organization. We do have a very different perspectives on the liberal world order and how the globalization occurs and affects us this part of the world. And also, last but not least, in regards with China, very also interesting thing to highlight, and maybe on China, just one very short anecdote is that just quoting on Deng Xiaoping, he always mentioned that you hide your weakness and also you bite for time. And I think this is also a long-standing belief that President Xi Jinping is also having in his sort of mindset. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for all the panelists for your remarks and presentation. We now move forward to the discussion. I think, if I may, I can expand the open discussion until 12, so 12:10. So we have about 25 or almost 30 minutes worth of discussion. I have with me one question from online, but if I may, I'd like to open up the floor. I see one gentleman there, 2 and 3. So I'll stop there. So I'll start with the one gentleman here. Please introduce your name and affiliation before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the time and opportunity giving to me. First time I introduction myself. My name is Ben. I am from Indonesian Catholic Student Association, PMKRI. My question is, we know the global politics tensions make me as a global societies very, very worried about the stability and the security of our world. My concrete question for the first, is what is a concrete action should be taken between ASEAN and European Union should have done to minimize the impact of the security and the economy of this war between Russia and Ukraine. And the second question that we know, let's see, beside the Ukraine and Russia war, we can look China in the global issues will invade Taiwan. Question for Mom Professor. What should Indonesia do at the time of the G20 later related to the war between Russia and Ukraine? I think that is my short question. I'm very sorry. Where my question is very simple. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Damar.
Thank you. My name is Damur. I'm from CSIS. My question is, what explains U.S. reluctance to give Ukrainians more advanced weapon systems such as ATACMS or maybe Patriot missile defense systems or maybe F-16s even? Because is it really off the table? Is it really upping the escalation ladder? Because we've seen so far, like, for example, early in the war, Ukraine has conducted helicopter raids within Russia proper, within Belgorod, it's within Russia. So technically they have already escalated anyways. And after all, Russians too have escalated their attempts by buying Iranian Shahed drones and attacking civilian infrastructure. So is it really off the table? It's like, what explains the reluctance from the United States from providing Ukraine with more advanced weapon systems, such as if Ukrainians have more advanced weapon systems, maybe they can push the Russian faster and with less casualties and end the war faster anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Damar. And third but not least, please introduce yourself.
My name is Riccardo from Stratford. This is a question for Mr. Alcaro. Considering that Belarus has agreed to base nuclear weapons, and at the same time the heightening of the Russian nuclear cyber rattling, can we expect that Warsaw is going to be lenient towards the to host USBMD systems, and what will be the implication towards the European security, considering that EU is really sensitive regarding the USBMD in the Baltic states? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I may, I can read the one question from online. So just to round it up to 4, if everyone doesn't mind. So I have here in the online audience ask from Fajar. He asked, what are the differences between the current 2022 Russo-Ukrainian war with the 2008 Russo-Georgian war? Why are there sort of deeper repercussions in the Russo-Ukrainian war in comparison with the Russo-Georgian war, and how and why the Georgian war was able to be to end at a very swift moment in comparison with the Ukrainian war? So I think that's 4 questions. I like to open up maybe from my right, from Giulio, all the way to Andrew. So Giulio, please feel free.
Thank you. Well, I'll, for the sake of discussion, I'll just stick to the first question. If I understood correctly, the question was about ASEAN-EU cooperation, potential cooperation to minimize the impact of the war. And the second part of the question was specific to Taiwan. China invading Taiwan, and what would be the European reaction to that? Okay. Very hard questions. Thank you for those. I think that the way forward for the EU would be certainly to one measure that has been proposed was the price cap on fuel and oil and gas. This is something that the European Union has insisted upon. The other perhaps I'm thinking creatively because it's outside of my remit. I am of the opinion that the real impact that ASEAN is mostly interested in, as has been discussed, is on the food and economic fallout from the war, the food crisis, oil crisis, the economic fallout, as Andrew has emphasized in his presentation. So, in an ideal world, the G20. The reason why the G20 was born was to grapple with the fallout of the financial crisis. You remember, in a different world when the US and China were actually cooperating. So in an ideal world, it would make perfect sense to maintain or increase the economic efficiencies of the world economy, to keep the trade system up and running, and to keep the architecture open, because that, of course, reduces prices. And as we all know, we are living with we are facing strong recessionary spirals coupled with stagflation. So it would make perfect economic sense to push for an agenda that aims at that specific, those specific aims. Unfortunately, we live in a different world from 2008 and 9, and even the pandemic has not allowed us to cooperate together under the same house to grapple these global challenges, which would make the G20 the perfect avenue where Europe and ASEAN and others get together. We are living in a time and age where, to make it very briefly, and to compound the pessimism that has been remarked at the beginning, we're not just witnessing geopolitical cleavages, but also political ones that go hand in hand with ideological ones. And by ideology, I am not pointing simply at the bipolarism emphasized by, I guess, Marvel movies and whatnot between techno-democracies and techno-autocracies. That's the real malign influence I see at play in the US, by the way. I'm sorry, I like to make jokes. But it's the ideological cleavages that have to do also with a revamped nationalism. And that nationalism then is coupled with the alluring sirens of protectionism and dirigism and industrial policy. So even the differences with an open world economy that you've remarked upon between our model and the Southeast Asian one are actually falling apart, because we're living in an era of beggar thy neighbor industrial policies, industrial subsidies, but are not just aimed at China. They're also creating potential problems within Europe and also between Europe and the US. So you see, it's very hard to answer your question precisely because of this tripartite set of issues and cleavages that we are facing. And how would Europe respond to Taiwan? Very hard question. I'll be very brief. There is an interesting foreign minister's statement that has been given following the following Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan at the G7 level. Southeast Asian countries have had their own statement in favor, of course, of peace and dialogue, and as emphasized by Andrew's presentation, also by maintaining their respective one China policies and peaceful resolution. But of course, the criticism has also implicitly been aimed at the provocation by Pelosi's visit. The G7 foreign minister's statement has actually been mostly criticizing China's saber rattling following the visit. So you see that European views are shifting closer to the US one, for the reasons I talked before. So what will happen is that there's going to be condemnation. There's probably going to be Western European nations, at least, not the Union per se, perhaps bandwagoning on sanctions, perhaps in case of an invasion. This is a tricky claim. I don't think military assets are in order, but there will be clearly a lot of attention to Chinese activities in Europe, even more, both in terms of economic activities, but also information activities. So this is something that will happen. I have a question for the panel. Can I ask it very quickly? Sorry, specifically because Andrew has mentioned that the ASEAN states have their own one China policy, which in our understanding is we acknowledge China's position, But in Southeast Asia's perspective is perhaps a different understanding, that there is a recognition that there is a one China. Western European and the US and Japan have an understanding that, yeah, okay, we acknowledge that China has that position. Do you feel, is it different in Southeast Asia? Are Southeast Asian states, for instance, to make the straightforward question, would they, by having their definition of a one China policy, would they then claim that the Strait, perhaps the UNCLOS does not apply to the Strait, UNCLOS and international waters, but perhaps a different convention, which is the Montreux Convention, applies to cross-strait waters, which is, you know, what China would claim. Those are internal waters, and so no warships from external countries should go through it. Sorry, just to understand. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulio. Just to clarify, I think your question it meant that does UNCLOS apply to the Taiwan Strait, because or another sort of convention needs to be, or at least for us believed to be, need to be developed just for that. Okay.
In light of the China, of the Indonesia or Southeast Asian nations' respective one China policy.
I see. Okay, I got it. Okay, maybe later Evi or Andrew can answer, but for now, I give the floor to Riccardo to answer any questions that you'd like, please.
Yeah, thank you. So the question about, I like the question about the differences between the 2008 Russian-Georgian war and the 2022 Ukrainian-Russian war. Let's start with the similarities. Both were initiated by Russia with no provocation. Russia was not threatened by either Georgia or Ukraine. But let's focus on, I mean, there are many other similarities, but let's focus on the differences. Why the Georgia war lasted so little that few people actually remember it today. It was in August 2008. The war lasted just, I think, less than a week, and it ended up in a Russian military victory. Although Russia's military performance, even at the time, was abysmal, or was at least very much below expectations. Actually, that performance, although victorious, was what pushed Putin into channeling a lot of money into Russia, into military modernization. And that's why so many people were surprised this year when they found out that the Russian military was not as capable as they thought it was. The differences are the following. The Russia war against Georgia had very limited objectives. It was not about conquering Georgia and ending Georgia as an independent nation, or at least cutting in two. It was not a war of conquest. It built upon pre-existing conflicts between two regions in Georgia, in which there was separatism against Georgia was strong. One of these regions, South Ossetia, in one of these regions, in South Ossetia, Russian involvement was crucial in supporting separatism and actually even creating separatism where there hadn't been much. But in the other region, Abkhazia, separatism was a real thing, and Abkhazia had fought a war against the Georgian governments in the early 90s. So Russia could actually, with some more credibility, claim that it was intervening in defense of these two regions, although the Georgian government was not actually especially threatening these two regions. And by the way, by international law, these regions were and still are part of Georgia's territory. The war happened at a time in which the transatlantic relationship wasn't really in a good shape. There had been massive divisions and a lot of resentment over the invasion of Iraq by the United States, which had divided the Europeans and created strong resentment in Europe against the United States. The Bush administration was in its final months. It was a very weak administration. Congress was in the hands of Democrats. The country was in the middle of a presidential campaign, and when the United States is in a presidential campaign, nothing else matters. There was the financial crash of 2008 was less than a month away, and you could already see the cracks. So the US administration was very much unprepared to do anything about that. And Georgia was not a strategic priority, and the Europeans wanted to, the war came as a shock, yes, but it came as a first shock after a period in which Russia was widely considered a difficult, but definitely a partner in the EU. At the time, the idea of imposing sanctions on Russia was unthinkable. And the Europeans actually did what many Russia supporters would like the Europeans to do now. They basically intervened as mediators, neutral mediators, negotiated a peace, facilitated a peace, but that peace was basically an acknowledgement of Russia's victory. The Georgians couldn't do much. They didn't have any support. I mean, they did have support from the Europeans and the Americans in the sense that diplomatically, the Americans and the Europeans continue to consider the two regions as part of Georgia. They condemned Russia's actions, but they did not take any punitive actions. So they did what many people actually would like the Europeans and the Americans to do now: peace on Russian terms. And all these conditions are completely different today. Russia's war against Ukraine is a war of conquest, aimed at destroying Ukraine as an independent nation, at least in its current shape. The original aim was to take control of Kyiv and probably annex, if not what Russia has already annexed of Ukraine, the whole country until the Dnieper River, so including Ukraine, which more or less would mean half of Ukraine. The war happened at the time in which West-Russia relations had gone already south. The war is not the first time Russia invades Ukraine, is actually the second time. And the first time, in 2014, Russia did get a piece of Ukraine, the Crimea Peninsula, and fomented a war in another part of the country, the now famous or infamous Donbass. And that was the moment in which probably a point of no return was crossed in 2014. The Europeans and the Americans reacted again in a way which is closer to what many Russia supporters would advocate now. Say they did condemn Russia, they did impose sanctions, and I can tell you, it would have been unthinkable up to 1 month before that the Europeans could sanction Russia. They weren't widespread, overarching draconian sanctions, but they were not insignificant either. Certainly, they were totally ineffective in terms of deterring Russia or reversing Russia's actions, but they were a sign, a punishment of Russia, and a sign that Russia could not expect business as usual. Although to an extent, the Europeans tried mediation. They created, against France and Germany, they created the so-called Normandy framework, in which they posed as mediators between Russia and Ukraine. But even there, they very much embraced, well, not embraced, but they very much conceded to Russia's view of the war. in fact, the Normandy framework was not officially a mediation between Russia and Ukraine, but between Ukraine and the separatist regions. And Russia pretended to be a mediator itself. Okay, although the Europeans, as much as the Americans, did not concede to that, but the framework was that. So the framework did not achieve peace, actually did not even freeze the conflict. It just reduced the violence, but it did not solve the conflict. And we've seen what happened in, and so this new invasion is also a consequence of the unwillingness of the Europeans to concede victory to Russia by way of the Normandy framework. US-European relations were better in February 2022 than they were just a couple of years before when Trump was president. Actually, Biden is the most Atlanticist president since Bush the father. So since the early 90s, more Atlanticist than Clinton and more Atlanticist than Obama, certainly than Bush and Trump. So, and the Biden administration prepared the ground, lay down did a lot of work, a lot of preparatory work to create consensus for a tough response if Russia were indeed to invade Ukraine. So these are the differences. And this actually is a good lead into the second question that was addressed to me about Eastern Europe becoming more willing to host US military assets. That was your question?
More like the ballistic missile defense, like
Yeah.
previous, in Obama.
Yeah, but you can no longer separate the two things. I mean, yes, definitely, definitely. The missile defense issue, I mean, if you ask me, in terms of who's responsible for this war, I would tell you it's Russia. No doubt about that. But that doesn't mean that the US and the Europeans did not make mistakes in the past. One of those mistakes, for me, was the US plan to install ballistic missile defense, part of its ballistic missile defense system in Eastern Europe in 2007. That was the plan. Well, that was when the plan became known. And another one was offering Georgia and Ukraine a prospect of NATO membership when there was no actual need for that. So that contributed to poisoning the atmosphere in West-Russia relations. But the Europeans, especially the Europeans, but for a time also Obama, believed they could build a constructive, a pragmatic relationship with Russia based on energy trade, based on security cooperation on issues of common concern, such the Iranian nuclear issue or North Korea. But they constantly decided to neglect Putin's ideology, and the ideology that became increasingly central to the legitimacy of Putin's rule in Russia, which is an ideology of empire. And according to that ideology, Russia cannot but control its surrounding, its neighbors, if it must be a great power. And Russia is either a great power or is not. And Ukraine is a special case because it's not Russia's neighbor, according to Putin. It's part of Russia, at least part of Ukraine. So we were a bit, we should have done more to prepare ourselves to face what we see now, a war of conquest. So yes, the BMD, the ballistic missile defense issue, was definitely not helpful, was totally useless in my opinion. But now, it didn't die out. Obama reframed it in a way which the Russians could see it as a bit less harming to them, but still harming. But it wasn't a big issue this year. I mean, the issue was not NATO expansion, as people like to say. By the way, NATO enlarges, doesn't expand, because I mean, I know this sounds pedantic, but countries do ask to become members of NATO, and there is a reason for that. Okay, I mean, you can contest the wisdom of the decision to by NATO to actually agree to those requests. You can actually and rightly see NATO as an instrument of US foreign policy, which certainly it is, but you cannot afford neglecting the reasons why countries look at NATO and not at Russia. And I mean, you have proof, a clear demonstration of why the Poles, the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Slovaks, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Latvians, the Ukrainians, and the Georgians have all, with no exception, preferred NATO to Russia. Actually, Ukraine was the single exception before the invasion. It is no longer.
Thank you, Riccardo. Ibu Evi, please.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think what Riccardo just explained already answered everything. I also have the same question, but to add one more, I think maybe it's also a question to Georgia. I think the fact that regarding the question, what is the difference between the war in 2008 and now? From my perspective, the role of full support from EU and US to Ukraine is very much add to this, because without full support from EU and US to Ukraine, I think it will be the same happen with Georgia at the time. So the fact full support from EU and US to Ukraine is very much add to this prolonged war. And of course, because the full support came from the strategic position of Ukraine than Georgia. And also the role of China is also important from my perspective, because Georgia is located in Central Europe, close to the area. So it may be tackled by China in that side rather than by EU, where in the western part, because the Ukraine position, it will be faced directly to the EU. So I think that's also make the war in today much more longer and severe than the one in Ukraine, much complicated, of course, if I may to add this one. And to answer your question regarding what Indonesia should do in G20, actually I tried to avoid this question this morning when the journalist approached me this morning, asked about what should Indonesia do and what is the perspective, because I think I don't want to endanger Indonesian government effort nowadays to survive the G20, because given my position as an advisor of the government to this G20. But at that time, I can only give you some normative answer that Indonesia have to keep lobbying all parts, all members of G20 to keep coming and make the agreement on the day. But well, you may be quite pessimist with what happened on the news yesterday, that President Biden questioned why he should be why he should meet Putin in G20. But I think Indonesian government just need to keep lobbying and then have a more constructive dialogues with all parties to make the common important agenda be agreed, because we would like to separate what is substantial event of the cooperation in G20 from these geopolitical issues, because whatever happens, we still have problem with climate change, economic crisis, food security, energy security, and it needs a solution. If we have been hosted by this geopolitical crisis, then the G20 is useless. And I also have some idea, maybe, but it's maybe G20 minus G7 can happen. So it's not, this is kind of not all maybe agree with what Indonesia or other part do, but not all countries in G20 agree with what G7 did. So there is a possibility G20 minus G7 may happen with some of the conclusion, because as we've seen in the dialogue on the energy, in climate change and economic, actually there is no difference. There is not much substantial disagreement among G20. What the problem is only the political. They don't want to sit together with Putin. That's it. But in other parts, there are a lot of agreement within G20, and the colleagues doing this in the economic tracks and SEPA track has taken notes, and they reveal some substantial progress in the negotiation for the cooperation in many parts of these issues. So we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. And please, Anu, you have the last word.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think I would like to respond to at least two questions. One is from Giulio, and the second is from the gentleman who asked what sort of concrete action that could be taken to minimize the economic impact of the war of Ukraine. These are two hard questions. I can only probably have some sort of messy and scattered answers to respond to these questions. But let me rephrase the questions. Is the current economic impact that we are suffering of the Ukraine already cost? Is it really a cost of the Ukraine war? Or does the Ukraine war only accelerate the impact of this sort of economic problem that we have? We have to bear in mind that before the Ukraine war, there are some issues with the pandemic, and issues and the fact that pandemic cannot even unite the sort of countries respond on how to deal with the common threats. And this would also illustrate how can we, as a global citizens, a global, communities of nations, can deal with major issues like climate change. Like the Game of Thrones says, the winter is coming, and how to deal with that. And we are busy with great power politics. To answer your question, that would be the first and probably a bit philosophical answer. The policy answer to that can range from, for example, the thing that has been done in line with President Jokowi's visit to Ukraine. He was concerned about the supply of wheat and fertilizer and grain from both Ukraine and Russia, and he thinks that he should become the part of the UN initiative to reopen the access. So there are some deals, some sort of, for example, the grain deal, to make sure that the grain would be reconnected to the global supply chain. Has it become successful? I'm not sure. Russia is certainly pulled out, and it depends on the rest of the international community to continue with the grain deal. But also, with the questions of the G20, we also have to come back to the nature of the G20. During the global financial crisis on 2008, it has become the continuation of the G7. Some international relations scholars expect that the G20 should become the new global norms writer, that should become a new, for example, New Deal, new Keynesianism, or so on and so forth. But it hasn't managed to do so. So the G20 remains as a technical organization. It cannot write the new norms. It cannot even channel the existing power arrangement to the most effective technical arrangement. So I think the questions of whether G20 should do something is overburdening the G20 for me, because this is a very technical organization, and Indonesian government as a president decides to only focus on some sort of technical issues, the energy transitions, the post-health pandemic, and the digitalization of economics. Can these agendas deal with the impact of the Ukraine war? I don't think so. So it rests on the notion that if we continue the economic cooperation, it will become the positive externalities to the security, which probably arguable today. Can we as speaking from the ASEAN, can we still longer believe on the belief that if we continue economic cooperation, if we continue diplomacy, security can be achieved? Because apparently, with regards to the Ukraine consequences of the economic crisis today, is the fact that some vulnerabilities already exist within the interdependence among nations, energy and so on and so forth. And there we are seeing the new trends that these interdependencies are being weaponized by some sort of countries. So this is $1 million question of how should we deal with the long-term impact. But what I want to say is probably there are some immediate impact and there are some structural impact. It become the longer homework for countries like Indonesia to deal with this. And to respond to your questions on one China policy, this is a very hard question. I'm not the expert of international law, but let me tell you a story of our field research for the joint project. We asked the question to an expert from one certain ASEAN countries. This person was an expert on international law, and we sort of asked this simulation: how if China invade Taiwan? What sort of international law can apply? And his response is straightforward. In this condition, international law remain a document. It will not become relevant since the lexicon of law would immediately be replaced by the lexicon of power. So this is the situation that ASEAN countries has been trying to avoid by maintaining some sort of ambiguities of their diplomatic responses, because ASEAN countries knows that should the war happen, we are too powerless to respond to this, and we are afraid that there are some dominoes effect should the war happen. So some militaries in Southeast Asian countries believe that if China decides to invade Taiwan, they think that the most immediate action that could be taken by by Beijing is to blockade Taiwan. To ensure, first they would apply the cyber disruption to ensure that there are no certain communication can be transmitted from Taiwan to the US to ask for support, and immediately they would blockade the strait, and they would apply some sort of disruption to access to the Taiwan. And if that happens, Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia would be afraid that their waters would be used by the Americans to do so. So the discussions now is not about the international law, but it's about how can we use the existing law as well as our powers to, for example, close the straits, close the international waters, and close the sea lanes of communication if we are afraid that our waters should become the access for the theater of wars. So these are the questions for ASEANs now. It's not only always about the question of international law, or this is already becoming the question of how a very symbolic and a very dialogue-based ASEAN can be translated into a more tactical and operational cooperation between countries that seek to maintain a strategic autonomy and seeks to maintain some sort of neutrality in this context. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the panelists for their answer. So I think we a bit ran out of our time, but if I may, I think if I can just exercise my prerogative power as a moderator, just I think there's still one question from Damar regarding the advanced weaponry by United States. Very briefly, I can just say that at the beginning, I think there is a increasing trajectory by the United States to provide some sort of advanced weaponry, starting from the Stinger missile and also Javelin, and now with HIMARS. But I think just to say that the experience that the United States has with Afghanistan and Iraq, that when if everything goes south, if something goes south, and their advanced weaponry is in the wrong hands and ended up in the wrong hands, they would not have that risk. So that I think that limits their ability to provide even more advanced weaponry. So I think I'll just stop there. And we are now, I think, 25 minutes pause of our intended time of event. Thank you so much for everyone that is present, for all the panelists, for all of you, the participants who are here in person at CSIS and also online. Thank you for your questions and also for your contribution. I just have to say a housekeeping announcement that we will have a lunch prepared for all of us at the pre-function room, so just across the auditorium. So please feel free to stay back and have lunch over there. And now I'd like to officially close the joint seminar between CSIS and EI. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you so much.